and welcome to today's webinar on visual takeoffs. Today we're going to discuss how you can start a takeoff in many different formats, whether it be from a PDF or a design that you're starting in the software itself, or maybe you have the original DWG or DXF files that you have from the architect. We'll show you how to bring in those designs and do a visual takeoff. We'll talk about the lumber, trim, finished materials that are going to go along with it as well, and then some value-added offerings that come out of having that visual takeoff as well. We'll also show you how to push all of this information to your point of sale system so you can have a seamless integration, and also how to push the information off to many different software packages as well. If you're using MyTech or Warehouser or any of those different products, we'll show you how to pass that information off as well. So we're going to start off by bringing in a PDF. And when I bring in this PDF for the basis of our estimate today, it'll be the same as if I brought in a DWG file. And as I'm drawing the walls and creating the various elements for our takeoff, if I didn't have that underlying PDF, it'd be the same if I was starting the design off in the software as well. So I'm going to go up to the top of the screen and I'm going to go to the File pull-down menu. And I'm going to choose Import. This gives me my import options of how I'm going to start off this particular estimate. Am I bringing in a PDF? Am I bringing in a CAD file? Or we also have this project trace image. This I would believe would be your worst case scenario if you have one of those scanned images that you brought in. So you have the original blueprints printed out and you have to scan them and bring them in. We'll still bring in that JPEG or that bitmap file that you've scanned. We have ways to resize it and to align it again, but because it was a scanned image, it's probably going to be your worst case scenario. But again, we can bring those in and use them to get a good estimate, not a great estimate, but a good estimate from those. So I'm going to import a PDF file. It'll look out on my hard drive for one, and I have one here that I'm going to open. Now, when you're bringing in a PDF file, it can bring it in two different ways because there are two different ways that the PDF could be created. One, it could be scanned. So if you look at the PDF that I'm showing right now, see how it looks a little pixelated, it's a little washed. If I zoom in, it only gets worse and more blurry. That's what we're calling a raster PDF, a PDF that was made by scanning an image. That might be the only way that this PDF was made, and it's good. We can bring it in and we can use it for an estimate. But if you're lucky enough that perhaps the original PDF was made in a CAD package like Envisioneer or AutoCAD, then we can bring it in a vector format, which means if I zoom in on this PDF, it's only going to look better and better. So that's your best case scenario, is when you can bring in that vector. Why it's the best case is because Envisioneer recognizes those lines from that original AutoCAD file, and it can snap to the corners. So you can be very accurate when you're picking all of those various points. Once I've determined if it's a raster, a scanned image, or a vector, I can uncheck that. Now I want to maybe realign it. So I'm going to go to angle here, and I'm going to go to a 270-degree angle. I want to rotate this piece of paper so it's in the right alignment that I want to use when I'm tracing over top of it. You can scale that or change that angle to any degrees you want to. That's especially helpful if you have to bring in one of those scanned JPEGs or bitmaps. You can pick that angle so that you can align it perfectly so that it's nice and 90 degrees. The next thing that I like to do is I always like to re-verify the scale. When you're bringing in that PDF, it's going to try to bring it in at the scale that it recognizes. So it sees 1:48, which is a 1/4 inch scale. But that could be the overall scale of the drawing itself. Maybe there's elevations and a roof plan on here as well, and that overall drawing was at a 1/4 inch, but maybe the floor plan of what you're bringing in is at a different scale. So that's why I always like to double check. To do that, I'm going to use one of these zoom tools down at the bottom of this dialog box, and I'm going to zoom in on just a portion of this plan so I can see those dimensions. Now I can pick the scale. So I'm going to show it 2 points and see how, because this is a vector, my cursor is going to snap to those points. I left click, go over to the next point, and I left click, and I'm going to tell it that the distance between those 2 points that I picked is 10 feet. When I click OK, this scale may change if this plan isn't at a 1/4 inch scale. If it is at a 1/4 inch scale, that scale will remain the same. So I'll click OK. It remains at 1 to 48. It recognizes this is a 1/4 inch equals a foot. So I just like to double check just to make sure. You'd hate to do a whole estimate and find out the scale was wrong. Everything is off in your estimate. So I always double check. The next thing that I like to do is to crop. Only bring in what I want to estimate and leave everything else off. I don't need the title block. I don't need the elevation at this point or the roof plan. I'll bring those in later. I just want the ground floor plan at this point. More lines means more extra things that you could click on and bring into your estimate. I like to really simplify everything so I know I'm only picking the things that I want to estimate. So I've rotated the plan, I've scaled the plan, and I've cropped it. The last thing I want to do is I want to dim it down. I want to bring down its intensity so that when I'm bringing it in, it's not as vibrant as the walls that I'm going to draw over top of it. So it'll become obvious what I've estimated already and what still needs to be estimated. If they were both as bright and intense, it becomes hard to distinguish. So I like to dim it down, and then I'll hit Insert. A copy of that PDF attaches itself to my cursor, and I left-click to insert it onto my estimating screen. Once it's in here, now I'm going to use it as the basis of my estimate. I'm just going to make it nice and big on the screen so everyone can see it nicely. The first thing that I want to start estimating is the walls. So up here under the Building tab, I'm going to tell it the various things that I want to estimate. So I'm going to start off by estimating walls. So I click on that wall button. There's a catalog panel over to the right-hand side of the screen. That's going to house all of your various elements that you want to estimate. So right now, I want to use the 2x6 cement board siding walls. I've packaged together in this catalog element the lumber, the cement board siding, and all the various elements that are going to go into this wall so I can estimate them all at the same time. So I'm going to pick on that package of 2x6 and cement board siding and move my cursor out onto this drafting screen. I right-click and tell it that I want to insert it by a baseline. I want of this PDF to use it as the basis of where I'm going to be doing my estimate. So all I'm doing is tracing around by picking on the corners of this PDF that I brought in to use it as the basis of my estimate. Once I'm done, I left-click and tell it that I'm finished. Because I was inserting it as a wall, it wants to know what I was tracing around. Was that the outside edge of the veneer? Was it the outside edge of the stud? Or was it the inside face? So if you're using this for a remodel estimate that you have to do, and all you have is the interior dimensions, you could trace around the interior of that PDF and tell it that was the interior face. I'll use the outside of the veneer because that's what I traced around and click OK. The walls that I had estimated highlight green. It lets me know visually that I have those estimated. I can then reach into my catalog and say, well, now I want to do some interior walls to estimate. I'm going to use a 2x6 load-bearing wall. All I have to do is left-click where I want it to start and left-click where I want it to stop, and it's put in. Again, so it's a left-click to start, a left-click to stop, and I'm going to bring it right over to this corner and left-click again. You'll notice that the interior wall, that 2x6 load-bearing interior wall, is a different color than my exterior. It's a visual cue that it's taking off different elements. Now I'll pick off a 2x4 interior wall. Left-click where I want to start and stop, and again, a different color, left-click and left-click. I'm going to right-click and tell it that I'm finished with the walls. So each wall that I'm going to be creating for this estimate is a different color, a visual cue, and each has different information that's assembling to take off. I'm going to double click on one of those exterior walls, and by double clicking on it, it's going to bring up all of the information about that particular wall. So at the very top, I can see it's my 2x6 cement board siding wall. At the bottom of this page, you'll see framing member 2x6. This wall is a framed wall. So when I'm drawing it, it's going to include all of the framing for that particular wall. If it was set to general, it would not frame, which is a great way, again, thinking of remodel projects, how to draw existing walls so they don't take off the framing of the original structure. You can draw them as a general wall, and then they're not going to have any framing included with them. That's how we also set up any kind of glass walls for bathrooms or any kind of wall where we wouldn't have framing associated to it. There's also concrete, masonry, girt, and log walls as well. By telling that this wall is a framed wall and I'm using 2x6s, if I click on this framing member, it'll take me into the catalog to choose different framing members that I want to use to frame this particular wall. And if I look at this 2x6, it has intelligence to it. I'm going to click on this Purchased Items tab. This is where I'm going to get all of the purchased item lengths for this 2x6. So I've got my pre-cut stud lengths that's only to be used down here in the lower right-hand corner for studs. I've got my 8-foot pieces that I say don't use it for blocking and don't use that for plate material. And then I have my pre-cut studs in the longer lengths. And then I have my 10-foot, which I won't use for blocking or plate. My 12-foot, which I can use for anything, which I want it to use for my plate. And the same with my 14s and my 16s. 18s and 20s are the lengths that I don't really want to use unless I have to. So never use it for blocking, headers, opening sills, or plate material. I want to special order those when I have to. Those are premium lengths. So you can see how you can set this up. So it's going to grab the lumber that you need in your preferred lengths when you want to order those. So those are my 2x6s that it's going to grab and frame with. Also associated to this wall is a trim tab. As I'm drawing this wall and I was tracing out that PDF, it was also putting in baseboard for me. So I'll get a linear footage of baseboard at the end in my report as well, just by tracing over those walls. We can break that baseboard into purchase lengths as well. So if you're selling 12-foot pieces or 16-foot pieces, instead of getting the linear footage, if you'd rather get the 12-foot and 14-foot piece lengths, we can tell you how many of each of those you're going to require as well. As soon as I punch a hole into this wall, it's also going to put casing around those openings for me, my windows and my doors. That's on the interior side. On the exterior side, we can also associate trim. So if you had any grate boards that you wanted to also put in, or some exterior trim around the openings, you can associate that with this as well. Automatically takes it off as soon as you start drawing that wall. The last tab here that I want to show you is the quantity tab. This is where it's going to assemble all of the materials that you want to include in your estimate when you're drawing this wall. So we have our cement board siding. It's got a 7-inch reveal, the nails that are for it, the house wrap, sheathing tape, the sheathing, the nails, staples for the house wrap, the drywall, joint tape, compound, drywall screws, insulation, vapor barrier staples, nails, gallons of paint. You can see that whatever you want to ship out and include in your estimate, you can have in this list. You can take things out and add them in. If you would rather have larger boards of drywall, we can include that. We can include as well if statements based on the area. So if you want the drywall to call on the larger sheets, depending on the area of that wall, we can create that. Everything that it is calculating right here for quantities are based on simple formulas that you can edit and you can change to update. So if you want to add in some waste factors or massage the waste factors for different things, maybe more waste on the drywall, less on the siding, you can massage those figures so that it works for your estimates. At the very bottom, of this list of assembled items, you can also see that we included just general areas. What's the interior wall surface area? What's the length of the exterior wall? I like to use those as a back check. So if I'm getting my drywall estimate, and I think the number is a little out, I can always look at my interior wall surface area just to verify everything, just to make sure I didn't forget something in my estimate. So it's a great way of looking at the entire estimate and just kind of back checking everything. So if it's in this list, it's going to be included in our estimate. So already by drawing those exterior and interior walls, we have a list to look at. So if I come up here to Tools and I analyze the model and I generate a project estimate, it will show me those items so far. It's going to expand it out into the screen, and I'm going to put it into kind of a quote order so it breaks it down into shiploads for you. So the first group that I have is the ground floor wall framing. Here's all of the framing that's associated to those walls that I've drawn. You can see it's a mix of 2x4s for those little interior walls that I drew, and 2x6s for the exterior and those interior load-bearing walls. It's breaking it into, I've included blocking, plate, and studs. There's my sheathing and the nails. And then I have a load of exterior finishes, which is my house wrap, the tape, and the siding. My next shipload is insulation. So I've got my batt insulation, vapor barrier, staples, then my drywall, and then there's my trim. So far, I've drawn almost 300 linear feet of MDF baseboard that I could order. These can all be mapped out to your SKU numbers that you're offering. So right now you can see I have generic SKU numbers in our generic database here, but these could all directly relate to the SKU numbers so they can read in and read out of your point of sale system. And I'll show you that further on in our webinar today. So here so far is our generic list. But how did it know how many studs and the plate lengths that I had? Let's take a look at the model here, and let's take a look at it more in a visual concept. I'm going to come up here to View, Framing, and display the framing. And now you can see all of the individual studs as they're being laid out in the wall itself. You'll also see numbers associated to them. Near the end of our webinar, I'll show you how I can break this all into individual framed wall panels that you could add as a value-added source to your builders. Not only are you supplying the material, but here's a panel diagram of how it all goes together and how you got your estimate. How did it know the spacing of these studs? I can find that here under Settings, Building Locations. The Building Locations dialog box is what it always refers to when it's drawing an element. So when it was drawing those walls, in the background, it came up here to this dialog box and said, okay, we're drawing on the ground floor. I know that any windows or doors are going to go in at 6'8". My ceiling height is 8 feet, and my wall height is 8'1 1/8". So when it called on those studs and it pre-ordered our 92 5/8 stud length, it's because it looked here and got that wall height. The last column of information you see here is framing options. These are framing options that are going to go into how I frame the walls on this location. So here you can see that it's infilling the walls with studs that are 16 inches on center, and it's including a double top plate, and it's putting blocking halfway up the wall. If I simply double click on that item, that'll bring me into a catalog of different choices that you can add to as well. So you can see that they can put them in at 12 inches on center, 16, 24, get into pole barns, steels, logs, however you want them orientated. I'll change this to simply 16 inches on center with a double top plate. Let's remove that blocking. I'll click OK, and OK, and OK. And then I'm going to pop this into a 3D view so you can visually see the framing that's involved in that as well. So there's our studs laid out, 16 inches on center, and you can see the double top plates. I might just put this into a rendered outline view so you can see those double top plates a little bit better as well. What if one wall needs to be changed? Because that happens quite often. Maybe in this back kitchen area, they're going to want a row of blocking so that they can put the cabinets up right up against that blocking. How can I change just a couple walls and not all of them? Well, by coming up here to View, Framing, Mode On/Off, it allows me to pick on the individual walls. So I can pick on the walls and tell them that I want to look at their properties. No, I don't want to refer to the building locations on how to frame these two walls. I want to use a custom infill, and I want to select it. And when I'm selecting it, I'm going to tell it that 16 inches on center, double top plate, let's put some blocking halfway up. Click OK, and you can see the blocking on those two walls. So a quick, easy way to customize the framing if you need to for individual walls. I'm going to go back out of framing mode, and now we can see the finished materials. So now I see my siding on the outside, my drywall on the inside, and it's got the, you can see baseboard running along the bottom. I'm going to put that back down into a 2D view. Let's carry on in our estimate and add further things. Next, I want to pop some holes into those walls. So right next to our wall tool at the top, I'm going to click on doors. Doors can be put in a couple of different ways, depending on how you want to estimate them. If you have a door and window salesman that's going to take care of all of the doors and windows, you don't really want to worry about ordering them, the doors and windows can go in, but not quantify. But what's important is that they go in because we want to cut that hole so it'll automatically frame around them and take away any of the siding material so we don't get too much siding. So I'm going to grab this French door, left click where it's on the drawing and place it in. It's cut the hole in the wall for that door. I'll go up to the top, I'll grab an entry door, place it where the door is, place another one over here to enter, grab an interior 32-inch door, place one here, place one there. So the doors themselves can be part of your estimate. You can include them with a part number, or you can turn them off. So if I double click on this door and then go to its quantity tab, what I would do here where it says include in quantities, I'd say don't include it. Don't include the door. So the 36-inch 9-light steel door would not appear in my list if I uncheck that. But it certainly has punched the hole through, so I know the framing is going to be right. Okay? That's the exact same methodology for the windows. Now I'm clicking on the window tool. Now my catalog panel to the right shows different window sizes. I can pick the actual window that I want to include or just get the size so that it's going to punch the hole correctly. And then all I'm doing right now is placing it where there is a window on the floor plan, and I'm left clicking. So all you have to do is go through the model, select the ones you want, and left click where they're going to appear. That gives me my, includes that window in the estimate, and it also punches the hole. So again, if I go up to Tools, Analyze, Generate the project estimate, just to take a look at our estimate again with those new items in, now you'll start to see header material being put into our estimate. It's automatically framing around those openings. You'll also see exterior openings added in. There's my door. It also included and assembled with it a lock set and a deadbolt. And there's my windows. If I scroll down even further, you can see that the interior doors and trim is further populated as well. It's including the doors and that I've included, and they've also put in some doorstop material and jam material as well, and lock sets with them. So as you're accumulating items in the drawing screen, it's accumulating them as well in that estimate. But I know in your mind you're thinking, well, how did it know my header size that I'm using? Well, that's going back up here to Settings, Building Locations, going back to those framing options. Here you can have preset header sizes. So I've got my load-bearing span table and my non-load-bearing span table. So it's going to look at those walls that I've marked as non-load bearing and load bearing and apply the right header sizes to them. So all my interior walls that were the 2x4 non-load bearing, I'm just going to span a 2x4 over top of them for the header. But for my load bearing span table, this is where I can tell it exactly how I want to frame up to certain sizes. So you can see here my presets are anything up to a 3 foot, I'm going to use two 2x4s. Any opening over 3 feet but under 6 feet, I'm going to use two 2x6s. And anything to 10 feet, I'm going to use 2x8s. If you know in your particular practice that you're going to be supplying 2x10s, anything up to 10 feet, regardless of the size, you can delete out all of these other spans and just say up to 10 feet, two 2x10s, done, and supply those out. And if you have openings that are larger, so I'm going to go up to 18 feet, maybe I've got a garage door to put in, that's where I can start to use some manufactured headers as well. So I'll put in a 9.5-inch PSL header. You can see how it's framing it out here. Click OK and OK. And now it'll frame with those elements, and they'll be included in my estimate as well. I'm going to pop that again into a 3D view so we can take a look at it. So we get that visual estimate. And I'm going to go back into that framing mode on and off. Because in here, I want to tell it that on that front door, there's a point load coming right down on it. And the header size, those two 2x6s that I specified, isn't going to cut it. So I need to specify a different header size, go out to engineering, and supply a different product here. So I'll select that opening, right-click, and look at its properties. Do I want to refer to the infill part of my building locations for that header size? No. I want to use a custom head sill jam for that particular opening, and that's where I'll tell it that I want to use that PSL header as well. Click OK, and if I zoom in there, you can see it's now updated that product for us. View, get it out of framing mode, go into our estimate, and that's where you'll see that included as well as our header material. So I'm going to zoom out here, and you'll start to see all of those different products being represented here in our estimate. So I need almost 4 feet of header material, so I would order a 4-foot piece, and we do have roundup values in here when we do push this off to your point of sale. Instead of telling it that I need 3.6667 linear feet of PSL, well, let's order at least 4 feet, probably order 6 feet. Okay, so we can get out of there. Put this back into 2D. Let's carry on as we're moving through here. We can also have just openings. So again, this is another way if you're not going to be quantifying the door or the window, but you need that hole cut for the header sizes, you can use just a simple opening as well. And that's just left-clicking to place those in, and they can be any size that you want them. I'll just put in a couple here. And that works for cased openings as well. It'll put the trim all the way around it for you you're going to get that trim quantity too. Now let's talk about structural floors. I'm going to put a structural floor underneath here, and I'm going to use some 2x10s. So I'm just going to double-click on the structural floor so you can see all of the materials that it's going to include when it does this estimate. So first thing it wants to know are some general properties. When it's putting the joist in and it's going to infill this floor plan with joists, what direction do I want to run? 90 degrees would be running up and down my screen. If I change this to 0 degrees, it's going to run left to right. So I want them to run left to right. I keep that at 0 degrees. Spacing is going to be 16 inches on center. These next settings, when it comes up against a beam, how do I want to handle the joist ends? Do I want to stagger them or overlap them? Or do I want to hold them back? So if I was using joist hangers, I'd hold them back at that beam. I'm going to allow it to overlap using stagger here with a 1-foot overlap. I can choose my sheathing material. I can choose my joist material, my sill plate material, my band joist material, rim joist, and if I cut an opening in after I put it in, the header material around that opening. So you can see everything that you can add in to estimate all at the same time. And all of these elements, this 2x10 that I'm using for the header or my 2x10 that I'm using for the joist, they're all labeled here with this quantity information, so they're going to go into the estimate in the right area. This is labeled as a floor joist with the floor systems. So we'll see that in our material report when we're done. I'm going to click OK here, and then I'm going to grab that 2x10 floor system, left click inside our house here, and I'm going to come down here and turn on the framing. I have it turned off as a default, but I'm going to turn that all on so we can see those joists going all the way through. So right now, because I told it to frame the floor for the entire perimeter, you can see it's got a joist running all the way through the house. Let's show it where our bearing points are going to be. So I'm just going to select the floor itself here when it's pointing at the corners, and I'm going to tell it that with this structural floor, I'm going to insert a bearing line. I'm going to tell it that there's a beam starting in this corner, left click, all the way down to this point right here, left click. As soon as I do that, notice the joists overlap and cut themselves. Let me show you that again. So I'm going to tell it with my structural floor that I want to insert a bearing line. I'm going to start it at this corner, left click, bring it all the way down to here, left click, and it automatically overlaps them. And those joists and the rim joists, everything will be included in my material report. So what about the beams and the foundation underneath it? I know some of you probably don't supply the concrete block or the poured concrete, but some of you I know do. So I want to show you the foundation underneath and the materials that we can get out of it. Just because you don't include the concrete, maybe you want the rebar and the chairs, and maybe you're supplying the sill plate. So let's see how we can get all of that material. So I'm going to put in a foundation underneath our ground floor here. I'm going to show it that I'm doing a foundation, and next I tell it the type of foundation. So depending on where you are in the world, we actually ship our software all over the world, and it's available in 4 different languages. So to recognize all of those different building methodologies, we've got them outlined here. So if you're using a monolithic slab, on grade situation, a full basement, or a stem wall and footing, we can include those materials. I'm going to do a basement so I can show you all of the materials. So once I've selected basement, I have to specify what I'm using. So I'm going to grab a poured 10-inch concrete wall. And again, when I'm grabbing this wall, it's not just the concrete that I can estimate with it. If I'm going to be putting in any rebar in that, it's going to grab that all at the same time. That's also true for the floors. When I'm grabbing this 4-inch slab, think about also estimating at the same time any mats that you want to put in for in-floor heating, any rebar, wire mesh. Because I have the area of the floor, it's automatically going to calculate those quantities if I want them as well. So you can estimate those very quickly just by choosing that product. Same with the footings. Again, I can get rebar, chairs, all of that from it. So I'll just grab the products I need, hit next, and this is how it's going to line up with my walls above. Next, finish. And now down here in the lower left-hand corner, I'll look at our foundation. There's our foundation walls. It automatically laid out and started to quantify for me. What I want to do in my foundation is insert a couple of beams where we have those bearing points. So I'm going to use our advanced member tool. In doing that, I'm going to tell it that the beam itself, do I want it to sit right on the floor level? No, I want it to sit 8 feet in the air. And I want to associate this beam with our structural floor above. And I want this beam to be a couple of 2x10s. And I'm going to make it 2-ply. Instead of 1, let's make it a 2-ply 2x10. And down below here, this is where we can make sure that it's in the right part of our estimate. So I'm going to tell it that this is a girder or a beam, and that it's not part of our wall framing properties, but it's part of our floor system, or I could say foundation construction, wherever you want to house it to make sure that it's in the right ship load. And then I hit insert. And then as I left click and I left click, it's automatically calculating two 2x10s for me. I'm going to repeat that, left click and left click. Those two 2x10s automatically again become part of the estimate for me. I can break them at a point. I could put in a Lally column if I was also going to be putting that in as well. Let me just grab a steel column here, a 4-inch. So I'll put a couple in here, and then what I could do with the beams that I had here, I'll say select all similar, so they're all selected, and then I could just tell them that I want to break them at a point, lengthen them, shorten them, wherever I want to do to make sure that that length is correct in my estimate as well. I'm going to go back to the ground floor. I'm going to add in ceilings. I'm going to add in roof. And then we'll take a look at that estimate again. And then we'll show you how to send this out to your point of sale system. So far, if I look out in a 3D view, we have our structural floor. There's the sheathing, our trim, our walls, the drywall, the siding, the openings placed in of our estimate. Next, we're going to be placing on ceilings. Ceilings can be estimated in a number of different ways. If I know it's just a flat, drywalled ceiling along the whole ground floor, I'd say ceiling by perimeter. It'd put in one big ceiling throughout the space. But if I knew that this particular plan had different types of ceilings placed in it, maybe one is a vaulted ceiling, maybe one is a tray ceiling, I'd want to do them by room so I could make sure that I'm estimating those individual ceiling styles correctly. So I'm going to do it by room to show you all of the different options that you can have. So I'll do ceiling by room. I'm going to do a 1/2-inch drywall ceiling. And then all I have to do is left click in the individual rooms. It doesn't matter if I'm in 2D or 3D. It can do the same thing in either mode. And it automatically puts a ceiling on top until it's finished. Now what I can do with those ceilings is I can change them to customize them. So I'm going to grab this one back here in what was denoted as the dining room. And I'm going to right click and look at the properties of that ceiling. Here you can see right now it's a flat ceiling. But as simple as saying I want it to be a tray ceiling, I can click OK and it's become a tray ceiling. The quantity information attached to that is going to update accordingly as well. It knows there's extra drywall attached to all of that. That could also be swapped out for a frame ceiling. Right now I have it set as unframed, but I can select that and tell it that I want to replace that with a framed 2x4 1/2-inch drywall ceiling. So not only do I just get the drywall, but I get the framing that's involved in it as well. Maybe this ceiling right at the front here, if I look at its properties, is going to be set to a cathedral. I'm going to click OK, and you'll see that originally it's going to put it in as kind of a hip cathedral, and there's arrows on each side. I'm going to select these two green arrows, these two edges here, and tell it that I want those to be a gable end, and click OK. So now you can see it peaks it up here. And then I'm going to select these two opposite ones and tell it on those that I want those ones to be just a 10-degree slope, and click OK so it's shorter. So you can see how customized you can get. So depending on the complexity of the design that you're doing the estimate for, it can handle it. It can either put in a simple flat ceiling throughout the whole space, boom, you've got your drywall count for a flat ceiling, or you can do the individual rooms and do all of the different custom work that they want in it. So your estimate's going to be reflective of that, and you're going to make sure that it's accurate. I'm going to come down. First, I'm going to do a big save on this project that we're doing. I'm going to call it test for us. And I'm going to start filtering out items that I don't want to see. You can see how complex it's becoming. I've got all the joists and all of that. So by simply saying turn off the floors, turn off the ceilings, I can click OK, and it becomes a simple view again. They're still part of my estimate. I'm just simply turning off their visibility because next I want to work on the roof. And when I work on the roof, I want it as clean as possible. So I'm going to come up to the roof tool and tell it that I'm doing a roof by the perimeter. We have 3 different ways of putting on roofs in the software. By perimeter looks at the exterior walls, and the shape of the roof is going to match the shape of the exterior walls. By picking points allows me to pick individual points. So if I wanted to include at the same time that front porch, I could deviate away from the exterior wall layout and pick the points around it as well. We can also put in roofs by individual surfaces. So if you had a roof plan and wanted to map out those individual surfaces, we can handle it that way as well. I'll do roof by perimeter. I'm going to put an 8x812 hip roof on. All I have to do is left click once in the interior of the home, and it will seek out those exterior walls and automatically put on an 812 hip over top of it. If it's not an 812 hip, a lot of your roofs probably have gables, multiple pitches worked into it, multiple plate heights. Let's play up this design a little bit and show you how you can customize it so you can play with all of those as well. I'm just going to left click on one edge of the roof, and when I do so, it's just like the ceilings. You'll see those individual arrows. Those individual arrows are all part of the individual sides of this roof. They're all pointing to those individual sides that it sees. The green arrow means I've picked on this one side, and if I pick on an arrow, I can change it to green as well. So what I do to the one side, I'm also doing to the other at the same time. With those two selected, I'm going to look at their properties. This is where I can say this roof, instead of being a hip with an 8 and 12, is maybe a 6 and 12. You see a lot of those roofs right now where everything front to back is one slope and the sides are another slope, or maybe they have a different overhang on the sides. Maybe it's a 2-foot overhang. Maybe instead of being a hip, it's a gable or a mansard or a Dutch hip or custom. That allows you to have many different slopes up one side. So think of a gambrel roof where you have to go from a 412 to a 1212 to maybe an 812. You can accomplish it with that, or even just a sloped arched roof or a double slope. Going into a front shed, you can handle it with that double. I'll make this a simple gable to start off with, and I'll click OK. Now our roof will update to show the gable running front to back. And if I look at that in a 3D view, we can see the material that are associated to it as well, and we can see that gable. I'm going to rotate this around, and let's play with the back part of this. Let's pick on this portion of the roof, and I'm going to pick on the arrows that are around it, and let's raise the plate height around that bump out at the back. So just those 3 sides are the ones I'm picking on that bump out. Those are the 3 arrows pointing to it. I'm going to look at their properties, and I'm going to go to the Support and Details tab and tell it that the support height out the back here is going to be 9 feet. You can change the raised heel or the energy heel if this is trusses, or if this was all in rafters, you could change the bird's mouth or the seat. I'm going to click OK, and you can see how it automatically gets raised up. So in 2D, we can see that happening as well. You can see it cutting in there for the raised part of that. So a quick and easy way to do all of that estimating for those roofing materials. The roofing materials, if I double click on this roof again and bring up its properties, it also has that same quantity tab that we had with our walls, where it's assembling all of the materials that I want to quantify when I draw that roof. So I have my shingles, my ridge cap, my starter strips, my coil nails, my sheathing, the nails, felt paper, drip edge, flashing, ice and water shield, ridge vent, soffit material, and nails, and again, general measurements. So depending on the material that you're quantifying and what you want to supply, again, that list can be edited, and the quantity information, all of those calculated formulas that we're using can all be changed and edited so it suits how you want to take off that material. So if you want to round up the factors a little bit so you have that waste factor built in, you can do that very easily. So when I look at that estimate, analyze, generate the project estimate, now it's going to be much fuller than when we originally looked at it. You can see we have our foundation construction. There's the columns that I put in. There's the footing concrete, anchor bolts, sill plate material, sill gasket material, the poured concrete slab. And again, think about providing with that poured concrete slab, even though you might not be providing it, but it can give you that general cubic footage or the square footage that you need when you're putting in in-floor heating and providing those materials, or the welded wire mesh or any kind of rebar. Our damp proofing. We also have the beam that we put in, the 2x10s, 16-footers, our floor joist material, our rim joist material, subfloor. We need 34 pieces of 4x8 OSB sheathing. We also have blocking, we have cripples of our wall framing. All of this is nicely filling into our estimate. And it's taken us 45 minutes, but I've been explaining that as we went along, so you can see how quickly you can get a quick estimate on a simple house just like this one. So how do we now pass this information to our point of sale system? How do we make sure that all the materials that we've included in this simple structure are also going to pass back and talk to whatever point of sale system that you may be talking to? We speak natively to many different styles, and I'll show you all of those options. So now we're going to go back up to Tools and Analyze, but instead of doing the project estimate, I'm going to generate a quote. Or for those of you that work with an ERP system, I can upload it to the ERP system. We'll generate a quote for today's webinar. So this is going to take that simple list that I had generated in my material list, and it's going to start mapping it out to my point of sale system. Right now it's just telling me that I have no prices associated. I like to make sure that my prices are just in my point of sale, but you can pass pricing back and forth. So if you want it to reside here and in your point of sale, that's information that you can sync together as well. Now when I'm in here looking at the list, now I have some editing options. So if I'm looking at a particular option like the floor slab here, I can tell it I don't want to include that, delete that out, or maybe I want to substitute that item. Knowing that I have that poured concrete, maybe I want to substitute it for something else. This is something that you can do further along in your quotes, thinking about maybe trim material. Maybe the clients haven't picked the trim, and right now you just want a linear footage of trim. But now they know what they want. You can come in and substitute it and grab that exact trim that they want. So instead of getting the linear footage of MDF, substitute it and replace it with the exact item that they're going to be ordering. So even though it's included in the list originally, a quick way of swapping out materials as they've changed items, you can just substitute those items out. You can also change the materials. Right now I'm in a mode, I'm going to go into mode 2 here. Looking down at the bottom of the screen, you can see that I can modify the records. Maybe I want to add a different margin or a different markup or a different price level. Maybe for a client, Bob the Builder A, you give a better price level than Bob the Builder B that doesn't have the same volume with you. So you can have different price levels put in here as well. Or a retail discount or a multiplier as well if you want to pump up maybe the value of some of these items as well, and again include more product. This can be sent out in different formats. First of all, I'm going to show you our reports. So I would generate a report here in Quote Generator if I wanted to maybe share it internally. Send it out to the yard as a pick list, or send it to my door or my window salesman. I can give them this simple list broken down into the different items. This is something I could send off as a quote as well. There's all the items that I want to include. I'm giving you treated sill plates. I'm giving you 2x10s for the floor joists. I'm not telling you how much. I could exclude all of that. And then there's my price at the very end. So depending on how much information you want to relay to them, you can take out all of that. You wouldn't want to maybe provide all of this information. Maybe just tell them, I'm giving you this SKU number, this description, here's the final price, not all these individual line items and how much you're going to give them, because that's just really a shopping list to go to another lumber yard. We can also do a pick list here. Here's my pull list. I can send that out to the lumber yard. And this is where I can say, over to the left here, I'm unchecking columns and decks and members and parts and trim. I just want it to be a door and window schedule. Send that off to your sales guy. Print that out. So all that information can be included. This could obviously be your company logo and your address. We'd appreciate it if you included ours, obviously, but we know that you'd probably want to include yours, so there's tools to do that too. And then I can export this out, give it a name, and tell it what point of sale system I want to map to. Am I going to BizTrack? Am I going to Advantage? All of the various point of sale systems are here. You pick the one that you want to map up to. I'll pick BizTrack, click OK, and then it gives me my list. And I can say, here's the full list, but I can also include, if I pick on this button, all of those original headers that it had as well, so that they could be included. And then I would just hit export. I'm not locally linked up to BizTrack, so it's going to start asking you for your login credentials and who the client is, so that it can map it up accordingly for you. You hit export, and it sends it off to BizTrack. A lot of material that I covered. I want to make sure that I leave the last few minutes for questions that you may have. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them up now in the GoToMeeting console that's on the left-hand side of your screen. And through there, I'll be able to read those questions and answer them for you. So just to recap the entire webinar for those of you that may came in a little late, I did tape the webinar today, and we will be sending you out a link so you can watch it again and share it with anyone else that you need to. But we started off the webinar by discussing how we start the quote. That could be by directly starting the drawing here in Envisioneer, or by importing a PDF file, a CAD file in, that CAD file could be in either DWG or DXF format, or it could be a JPEG or a bitmap that's been scanned in. Once you import them, and if I turn off everything, display nothing, we have our simple PDF that we brought in. Through there, we use the various tools, walls, doors, windows, floors, roof, ceiling, to reveal our model. Display everything again. And we built this estimate by simply tracing over that PDF, showing it where the walls were, showing it where the windows and the doors are. And as it did that, it assembled all the materials that it needed and created that material list for us. Once we had that, we could send that out to our point of sale system through our Generate Quote tool. We also briefly discussed value-added information. We have this 3D model. If you want to also add wall panel diagrams, you can also produce those. They're automatic. It knows each individual wall that it has, and it can create the wall panel diagrams associated with those. So not only are you supplying the materials, but also the diagram of how that's all going to be put together. So that could be a great way to add extra value to your builders. We could also use this for maybe the general homeowner that comes into your store. Perhaps they want to build their own shed. Very quickly, you could draw out the shed and then provide them with the material and these wall panels so they know how to build it once they get it home as well. So those are kind of value-added elements that you can provide. We can also generate different types of schedules, door schedules for your door and window salesperson, member schedules that will individually mark all of the different floor joists or deck materials that you're drawing. So you can provide those schedules as well. So let's take a look now and see if we have any questions or if we've got a quiet crowd today. There doesn't seem to be any questions up there, but I am going to hold the line for the next couple of minutes, just in case anyone does have a question. I don't want to cut you off in your questions. But if there aren't any questions, we will end it off in a minute. And following the webinar, we will send you out a link so that you can watch the presentation again. And there'll also be an email address in there, so if you do have any further questions, please feel free to privately send us back an email and ask us questions about how you could incorporate Envisioneer for your estimates in your business as well. We also have training programs available to learn the software. We start off with just the simple basics under the Help pull-down menu. There's a little quick start guide, but we also have custom training material really customized on estimating with the software or designing with the software if you also wanted to use it for working drawing purposes, or it also has rendering capabilities. So if you wanted to get into any of that, we can include that in any kind of training material that you'd want to as well. We also have services, so if you don't have the time to link this up to your point of sale system and you wanted us to take over with our expertise to do that, we can do that for you as well. We'll include all of that information in our follow-up email to you. There doesn't seem to be any questions. I do have a quiet crowd today. I'm getting a thank you, so thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And again, if you do have any questions and want to ask them privately, never hesitate to contact us. We're here to answer any questions you have about generating a visual material takeoff and estimate. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.